As some of you may know, our president, Jimmy Carter, had a campaign based on truth. And that truth campaign started a long time ago when he was a kid back in Georgia. He was born on a huge cliff. On this huge cliff was a big white house. And right next to this big white house was a small white house, an outhouse. And one day the outhouse was found at the bottom of the cliff, all smashed to smithereens. And that's when Jimmy Carter's father gathered his boys together and he said, "Boys, I'd like to know who kicked that outhouse down off the cliff." And none of the boys raised their hand. He said, "Well, looks like I'm going to have to tell you fellas a story of truth. A story of the father of your country, George Washington. When George Washington was a little bit of a spit shaver, he had himself a pickaxe. And he looked in the backyard one day and he saw the cherry tree standing there all by itself. And he took that chopping axe and he chopped down the cherry tree. And when his father came home from working 16 hours at the still and he saw the cherry tree was strewn all over the backyard, oh boy, he was mad. He run inside the house, looked at his son George Washington and said, "Hey boy, who chopped down the cherry tree?" And George Washington looked up at his father with a mouthful of mustard green. He said, "Daddy, I cannot tell a lie. I did it with my little chopping axe." Chop, chop. And boys, don't you know that's when George Washington's father's chest swelled with pride? He looked on his son, patted him on the head and said, "Boy, for telling me the truth, I'm going to give you a reward. Here's some pictures of Betsy Ross taking the shower. And also a copy of the National Geographic, the Africa edition. Now, if you boys tell me the truth, who kicked that outhouse down off the cliff, I'm going to treat you just as fair, just as square as George Washington's pappy did when he said he chopped down the cherry tree. Now tell your daddy who kicked that outhouse down off the cliff." Well, this is where Jimmy Carter's truth campaign started. Because he stood up like a true Southerner. Just as brave as General Lee when he surrendered to Grant. And just as brave as George Wallace when he said to Mayor Coleman Young of Detroit, "Get that chocolate cake off my table." He stood up and he said, "Daddy, I did it. I did it. I kicked that outhouse down off the cliff. I had to do it. The door was locked. I couldn't get to the newspapers." And that's when Jimmy Carter's father looked at his son. He backed up about 5 paces, reached around and got a hold of an axe handle, and he beat him on the head. And he drop kicked him over a sack of peanuts. And Jimmy laid there. Disbelief was written all over his battered face. He told the truth, yet his father beat him up. He looked up at him from a pile of bleed and he said to him, "Daddy, why you beat me up? I told you the truth. I thought you was going to treat me just as fair, just as square as George Washington's pappy did when he said he chopped down the cherry tree. Why you do it, Daddy?" And that's when Jimmy Carter's father said, "Son, George Washington's father wasn't in the cherry tree.